how to take long exposure photos with your iPhone. Now, if you don't know what a long exposure photo is, this is what I'm talking about. When you see photos of some nice, silky, buttery smooth waterfalls and other things like that, I'm going to show you how you can do this with your iPhone. And trust me, it's much easier than you think. But before we can do that, we need to understand how a long exposure photo works. Now, with the traditional camera, how it works is the shutter is left open for a long amount of time, causing a blurred effect. Now, with the iPhone, it's going to be done similarly, but not exactly like a traditional camera, but we'll get into that later on when we actually are taking our photo. In our case, with the iPhone, we're going to be using the live photo mode, which is the only time I ever recommend that you use live photo. But before we start this, there is one thing you're going to need, which is going to be some sort of tripod. You don't need some huge, crazy expensive, fancy tripod. Literally, this is all I'm going to be using. This little tiny Gorilla Pod that you can stick a phone on. This was literally like $20, and there are even some cheaper options out there. All you need is some sort of way to stabilize your phone. If you find yourself out and about on the go and you want to take a picture with a live photo and get a long exposure, you can even just set your phone, prop it up on something. You just want to make sure it is holding still and not moving at all. Unfortunately, you can't just hold your phone with your hand. Your photo is going to end up blurry, and you'll see why. So I've gone out to one of my favorite spots to take photos and found this perfect area with two beautiful little waterfalls right in front of me. I've already gone ahead and set up my composition. I have some beautiful clear water here in the foreground, the subject in the middle, and some nice green forest in the background. I decided to stick with my standard focal length with this photo. I found that the wide-angle lens was showing too much of my environment and there was too many things going on. And I found that the zoomed in or the telephoto option was too zeroed in on my subject and not showing enough environment. So I decided to just stick with the standard focal length. And finally, I have my phone set up here on my little tripod, so we are now ready to finally start taking our long exposure photo. Also, I want to apologize in advance for any camera shaking on the phone. I tried my best to prevent it as much as possible, but doing things like this, it's bound to happen. With that being said, let's go ahead and head back into our camera and tap the live photo icon up in the top left-hand corner to enable live photo. Next, let's tap the screen and make sure our subject is in focus and adjust the exposure to our liking. Next, let's tap this icon so we can apply a 3-second timer. Applying a timer is going to get rid of any camera shaking that could happen when tapping the screen to take a photo, which will help our picture be as sharp as possible. Once we have our subject in focus, our exposure set, and our timer on, let's go ahead and tap the shutter button. This is then going to give us a 3-second countdown because of our timer, and there you go, our picture is taken. Once we've taken our live photo, we want to tap this little thumbnail in the bottom right hand corner to view it. From here, we want to tap the bottom of the screen and drag our finger up. This is going to open up a row of effects that we can apply to our live photo. We have the standard live photo, a loop, a bounce, but what we want is long exposure at the very end. Once we tap this effect, our photo will automatically be converted into a long exposure photo. And just like that, we have some beautiful smooth waterfalls. It is really that simple to create long exposure photos with just your iPhone. But just a quick recap, to take long exposure photos, you're going to need some sort of way to stabilize your phone, the live photo feature to be turned on, a 3 or 10 second timer to be added, and the long exposure effect to be applied. I hope you've learned a lot in this lesson, and I can't wait to see some of the photos you take with your iPhone. Macro photography is a genre of photography that specializes in taking photos of really small subjects. Some really popular things to take photos of when it comes to macro photography are things like flowers and insects, but you can take pictures of anything that is small that has a lot of cool detail, like your eye for an example. In this lesson, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to set up your phone to take the best possible macro photos you can. These woods I was in didn't end up having a whole lot of flowers in them. So I decided to take a picture of this nice green moss that I found on this rock. But as I started composing my shot, I thought that this picture didn't have enough going on in it and that it was lacking in subject. So I came up with an idea to take my silver ring and place it on top of the rock. I thought that would be a great subject to add to this photo, and the green moss would be a really nice environment and color to add to it. There's a lot of details on my ring, so I thought it would be perfect for a macro photo. Lots of times when I take macro photos, I like to zoom in with the telephoto lens. The reason I zoom in and don't just move closer to my subject with my camera is because the closer you get with your camera, sometimes the camera can't focus on the subject if it's too close. So zooming in is a great way to get closer to your subject and capture every little detail, especially when you're doing macro photography. Also, the more zoomed in you are to your subject, the more blurry the background is going to be. So when you're doing macro photography, I always recommend that you use the telephoto lens to get a much closer shot. And just like that, I've captured a super cool and interesting macro photo of my ring. After that, I went on to take some more photos of the ring, this time of it on my hand, and I had a lot of fun capturing a bunch of cool macro/product photos of this ring. So when it comes to macro photography or any type of photography, don't be afraid to play around and experiment and come up with new interesting perspectives and photos. Any idea you have, you should just go for it and take the photo. I think some of these pictures that I took turned out really cool, and I can't wait to edit them. And I can't wait to teach you how to edit your pictures later on in this class. Alright, it's time to cover everyone's favorite mode to use, which is portrait mode. Now, why do we like portrait mode so much? Well, it gives us those nice, buttery smooth, blurry backgrounds that look so good in our photos. But the iPhone isn't achieving those blurry backgrounds the same way a traditional camera is. The iPhone is simply choosing a subject that it thinks the subject is and isolating it from the background and then using pretty much a filter to overlay the background and make it look blurry. And the reason why portraits are so good for this mode is because it's really easy to see the difference between a portrait or a person standing there and the background. It's really easy for the phone to isolate that subject. But just because the mode is called portrait mode doesn't mean you have to only use it for portraits. If you're taking a picture of any sort of subject and it's really easy to distinguish it from the background, I would try using portrait mode before using the normal mode, because a blurry background is a really good way to make your subject the main focus of the image. But with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the portrait mode and take a quick look at what it has to offer and some things you may not have known about it. When you enter portrait mode, the iPhone is going to automatically look for a person's face to focus and lock onto. Once it does, it's then going to use computers inside the camera to start blurring out the background. But while we're in portrait mode, we have a new row of icons down at the bottom that are similar to filters. They're different lighting effects that you can apply to your portrait photo, but just like the filters, I don't recommend using any of these because you can achieve the same effect in After Effects, but much better. But they're your portraits, so it's really up to you if you want to use them or not. In portrait mode, you're also going to have the option to choose between the standard focal length or a wide angle lens. But I want to introduce you to this new icon that appears in the top right hand corner when we are in portrait mode. This little F symbol, if we tap it, will bring up this meter. This meter basically controls the depth of our photo, aka how blurry the background is. If we slide our meter to the left, you can see the numbers getting smaller, meaning our background is getting more blurry. And if we slide it to the opposite direction, making the numbers larger, this is going to make our background less blurry. Even though lots of times you want to get that buttery smooth background that lots of photographers achieve in their photos, I would try to refrain from taking the depth as low as it can go to get a blurry background, because sometimes the iPhone doesn't do the best job at separating the subject from the background and it can look a little choppy. I like to keep mine somewhere in the middle to keep it looking more natural. But like I said at the beginning of this lesson, use portrait mode as much as you want because it's one of the best tools that the iPhone camera has to offer. How to use the night mode. When your phone detects that it's in a dark setting, the phone will automatically switch over to night mode. This little icon here will appear in the bottom letting you know that night mode is on. Once we tap it, it'll bring up this meter letting us choose between auto, off, or max. When you take a photo using the night mode, it's going to take a little bit longer photo, similar to a long exposure photo, letting more light into the picture. So once we have night mode on, let's go ahead and tap our subject and make sure it's in focus and adjust our exposure. But I feel night mode is only so helpful to a certain extent. If we turn night mode off and just take a picture with the normal camera, we can pretty much get the same exact looking photo if we adjust our exposure properly. They pretty much look identical. If you're taking a picture of a subject that is already producing a lot of light in a nighttime setting, then having the night mode on isn't really a must-have. But since you can put night mode on auto, it doesn't hurt to keep it on because it does work really well when you are in a very, very dark setting. So I recommend just keeping it on auto because it doesn't hurt to have it. But something really great about the night mode on your phone is, unlike a long exposure photo, you don't have to have a tripod to be set up and you don't have to be super still. The night mode does a really great job at taking smooth, crispy photos even if you're walking around with your phone. So it's really nice having that freedom, being able to move quickly and getting shots you want instead of having to set up a whole thing to capture one picture. But I think that's going to cover it for night mode. There's not a ton that goes into it. It's really just something in the background and it doesn't hurt to know how it works. But it also makes it really nice that we're not constantly having to adjust it or do things to capture good night photos. In this lesson, let's quickly go over how to best utilize burst mode on your iPhone to take the best pictures. Now, if you remember, back in one of the first lessons, we went over the best camera settings to apply to your iPhone to take the best pictures. In that, we set our iPhone to take a rapid fire burst mode if we hold up on the volume button. So if you hold up on the volume button, it's going to take a whole lot of pictures. But if you're going to take a whole lot of pictures, I recommend going back into your settings and apply prioritize faster shooting. And you're going to have a much better time. Your phone is going to take the pictures faster and there's going to be less buffering. But make sure you don't get confused with holding up on the volume button and not holding down the bottom one. If you hold the bottom one down, it'll actually start taking a video, which is a really nice feature that they added. But when it comes to using the actual burst mode and taking pictures of things that are fast isn't really necessary to use the burst mode. The iPhone already does a pretty good job at taking pictures of things that are moving quickly and freezing them in time. I personally use the burst mode in situations where I have a subject that is moving. I want to take a series of photos and then go through and choose the best one where they have the best movement and pose. But that's pretty much it when it comes to burst mode. It's pretty fun to use, so go crazy and get creative and take some awesome pictures with it. Panorama mode. What is a panorama? A panorama is basically a really long photo that you can use as a banner or anything like that. It's just a really long photo. Lots of times it's used if there's a landscape and your lens isn't wide enough, you can use the panorama mode to capture all of it. So basically on the iPhone camera, if you go all the way to the right, there is a pano option. To take a pano, you just want to tap the shutter button and make sure you're holding really still. You can use a tripod, which is more ideal, but it's perfectly fine just holding it handheld. You'll still get a perfect panorama. But basically, you just want to follow the instructions the iPhone has given you and steadily hold your hand and move your iPhone from the left to the right, capturing everything you want in your picture. So it's kind of weird how it works. It's kind of like a hybrid between a video and a picture. You're taking a picture and then moving across, and it's capturing everything that the iPhone sees. But I will give you a little tip. Taking a pano does not really work when there are moving objects in the frame, especially when you're really close to them. As you can see, someone is taking a pano and I am in the frame and I'm moving around and I just get warped and look super weird. It's kind of funny, but it just doesn't look good in the pictures. But in this example, I'm taking a pano of this beautiful canyon and this winding road going down, and there are cars moving in the frame, but they aren't affected. If the subject or source of movement is far enough away from the camera, it will not cause any warping or streaking in your picture.